Robert Halfon, you were born in 1969 in London. You're born with a form of cerebral palsy. Tell me about that.
Well, when I was younger, I didn't start walking. Obviously, I don't remember this. My parents do. I do remember getting up and falling down, and then when I did start walking, I was walking on tiptoes. So I might have made a great ballet dancer, maybe. But funny enough, even if I can't look at any ballet today because like when people put their fingers on a blackboard and you kind of cringe. When I see ballet dancers now, I feel that feeling of when I used to walk on tiptoes because it was painful. And the doctors at the time told my father that I wouldn't be able to do anything with my life, and because it was pretty backward. We're talking the 70s here, and I should go to a special school. And my father didn't believe it and took me all over the world. But I then got to Israel and America, but actually a place where we went to Great Ormond Street Hospital, and this incredible professor said that he would sort me out, and I started to have operations from the age of 6 or 7 on my legs. And this was this great guy called Professor Lloyd Roberts, who I do remember. I used to end up going to his room every week, almost every week, and to have physio every week at Great Ormond Street Hospital. So that hospital and that doctor changed my life. And then when he passed away, it was his successor that carried on looking after me. But that's what it was all about, really. And it's called spastic diplegia, so it's a form of cerebral palsy. And what's happened is because I've had so many operations as a child and growing up to the age 16, 17, it's given me osteoarthritis in my left leg, so which has caused a few difficulties. But I get on pretty well. At school, I was lucky because I did normal things, and in fact, at sports day, I was able to sort of half run. They gave me such a head start in sports days that people would always want to be on my team because our team would win, because we'd have too much of a head start, in essence, when you have whatever it's called, the shuffle or whatever. So there were advantages, and I was always bizarrely a good swimmer. So I got bronze and silver. I couldn't do the diving, getting up the diving board to do the gold, but bronze and silver. And even to this day, if you saw me in the water, you'd think I was making it all up.
Wow. Did you ever think that your disability, because of the discrimination that exists, did you ever think that it would hold you back?
I think it's held you back in different ways. I've been very lucky. I mean, I've been born with a personality with a lot of stamina. I've never felt disabled, genuinely. In fact, I don't like that terminology. I feel my legs are, if we weren't on TV, XXX, but I never feel disabled.
Interesting.
Where it holds you back is sometimes that when you can't do things other people can do. So even when you're young and growing up and people walk ahead of you and you're always behind, so you might be that you might not go to as many events or being able to participate in as many events as your friends are, so you might have less friends. So it can be tough, and there were also very tough attitudes in those days for disabled people.
Were you called names?
Never. I was never bullied, but there were misunderstandings. So I remember one time often I was at home, so because I had operations, although I did do a lot of schooling, so when I did go to school and make friends, I liked it. And one time I became friends with a girl, I'm talking about primary school age, very, very young. In fact, it might have even been before that. And then the girl who was supposed to come and play with me on the day, we were told on the day that she wasn't coming, and I had been looking forward to it for weeks. I remember looking outside the window, really feeling upset, and I found out it was the attitude of the parents, because she was going to play with some weird kid, basically.
Right.
Yeah. But there were lots of kind of those attitudes that people didn't understand disability, and I think we've moved on hugely.
Is Parliament a good place for making reasonable adjustments?
Parliament is, well, they give me a Segway, which is a 4-wheel. I've got a 4-wheel Segway. I couldn't do the 2-wheel one because it's like a roller skate and you can't balance on it. But I've got one with 4 wheels, And so I zoom around the corridors, and that has transformed my life because, as you well know, going around Parliament is like a football pitch. And this Segway is called a roller scoot, and it's being invented by a physio in Devon. It's really good, really good. And I want him to succeed. I'd love him to develop a prototype. And if anyone was watching in your programme wants to support this and just look up roller scoot, please contact him. But that has made a huge difference. But in terms of, it's appalling. I mean, you have heavy doors that are shut. The lifts never work. The toilets are rubbish. Not everybody, whether able-bodied or not, uses disabled loos, so you then have to walk further and no one cares, and you mention it to the authorities, nothing ever happens. And I've done it since I was an MP. But they've been very good to me, and they've given me the Segway. I park outside my office virtually in Speaker's Court. The people are very nice, but the building and the facilities are terrible.
Yeah, what do you do about that? Do you think that, because it's
well,
not,
they
it's
could
not
do
right, you're
something,
supposed
so
to...
they could keep doors open.
Yeah.
And I can do it, but there are people worse off than me, but because I know my situation, I know what we have to go through.
Yeah.
And they could have make sure that only genuinely disabled people use disabled toilets. There's very simple things, but they don't care. And they could have slopes instead of stairs and things like that. So it's pretty bad. I mean, if you wanted to come through from St Stephen's entrance or from Westminster Hall, it's virtually impossible if you're in a wheelchair or need some kind of have mobility problems, for example.
Right, so you became a Tory MP at the same time that I became a Labour MP. But I read that at the age of 10, you knew you wanted to be an MP?
So what happened was an MP came to my school, again, God's honest truth, and he started saying that the House of Commons or House of Parliament had 1,000 rooms. And I was a 10-year-old listening to this, and I loved history, politics. And I was thinking, how could anywhere have 1,000 rooms? This is 10 years old. So I demanded to go to Parliament, like every day. I wanted to see this place that had 1,000 rooms. And eventually I went. I can't remember how I went. I think it must have been a school drill family. And I said, this is the most incredible place. I'm going to be an MP. And I didn't know what politics was in those days, but I decided I was going to be an MP. I remember going to Central Lobby. There wasn't all these extra buildings, it was just Parliament, and walking through St Stephen's entrance, just seeing the statues and God knows what on the ceiling, just thinking, this is incredible, I'm going to be an MP.
Now, I've always thought you're quite a relatable, regular, good with people guy, but that makes you sound weird. Like, who wants to be an MP at age 10?
Well, you can't explain these things. You can't explain, why does it happen? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I read a lot as a child, so I read a lot of books, although as a younger it was all obviously fiction, but I started to read newspapers from a really young age. I didn't have Hansards like William Hague under the bed cover, but I had millions of newspapers. I had them piled up in my room. And my father said my room was a fire hazard because I used to cut the articles out. So I started doing that from quite a young age as well. And it is a complete weirdo thing to do. I completely accept it, but you can't explain it. No, you can't. And then every day from the age of 10, I thought, I'm going to be an MP, I'm going to be an MP, I'm going to be an MP.
Wow. And then what age do you decide that you're going to be a Conservative MP?
I think that started about 13 or 14 because I joined the local Conservatives because I started to listen to what Mrs Thatcher. So there was another thing that happened at 10 years old. My first ever kind of experience of Mrs Thatcher was reading my mother's Daily Express on the floor of our house and the front page, and there was it was the 1979 election and Mrs Thatcher got in, and I started to follow, sort of keep an eye on what she was saying, and I thought, I love this woman. As it happened, Queen Elizabeth I was my favourite queen in history in the 16th century, and for some reason I loved Thatcher, and I just thought it embodied what our family ethos, which was education, work hard, save hard, that's how you get on in life. And that was very much the Thatcherite ethos, instead of the way we saw it.
Was Margaret Thatcher the Conservative leader that has meant the most to you?
So I grew up loving her, and at university we were all Thatcherites. I was there with Sajid Javid, Tim Montgomery, other political people, David Burrows, former MP, Nikki Aitken, who's now the MP for Westminster. We ran the University Conservatives. I think it's a bit like the book Death of the Salesman, when you have this guy, you idolise someone as young and then you realise they have flaws as you grow older, and it's an amazing book for that. And so I realised that there were flaws, and you kind of grow up realising there were a lot of flaws in it, but nevertheless, I still believe in a lot of what she stood for, and even with the flaws. I'm proud. I have a picture of her on my wall. So I suppose, given the influence she had on my life, when she died, I felt it here. So much of my life had been influenced by her. I got up at 4:00 in the morning, went to St Paul's Cathedral. Most Conservative MPs were invited. I don't know if you were there, but I was asked to do an article for The Guardian on the day, and I went to a coffee bar just opposite St Paul's because they were open 24 hours. But it was like I'd lost a close relative. It was really strange because of the impact she'd had on my life.
Sounds like she would be she's definitely the Conservative leader that's had the most connection with you throughout your life.
Absolutely.
She wasn't posh. She definitely wasn't posh. Does it matter? Does it matter what?
No,
because you had a relatively you went to private school, which I was interested in actually because of of what you talk about and the issues that you focus on. I've always thought, maybe he's a working class hero, so there's nothing wrong with your upbringing, of course.
My father came here as an immigrant with nothing, and he sold fruit and veg wholesale in the East End of London to hotels, posh hotels. So I spent a lot of time in hotel bars where he'd be talking to the chef, negotiating, selling them 10 boxes of peaches or whatever it was. And I know all the hotel bars in London as a result, by the way, even now. I mean, because I would sit in them waiting while he was doing all this. But he wanted to send me to private school. I'm very proud of it. Funny enough, on the Wikipedia page, which is full of inaccuracies, I never bothered to change because they just get put up the next day. But there used to be a picture of Highgate School Chapel that they would put up on there, thinking that I was embarrassed about Highgate School Chapel. And they forgot that I'm Jewish. I never went to the Highgate School Chapel, even though I went to Highgate School. But it's funny, the one building they put up was Highgate School Chapel. But I'm very proud of my background. It's middle class. We did well under Mrs. Thatcher. My father lost everything, virtually. He lives overseas now, but he lost everything in the ERM recession.
Right.
So, but by the time I just finished university, I was making my own way in the world, but I'm very proud of my background, but I think what has had a huge impact on my politics is being MP and parliamentary candidate here since 1999.
And I know what you mean by that because it changed my politics representing Ashfield. But tell me, did it change your politics representing?
Hugely.
In what way?
Because, as you pointed out, I came up from a relatively well-to-do background, although I've struggled in different ways. But when you come to a position like this where people really struggle for the cost of living, that's the number one issue, and depend on public services, and passionately believe in the NHS, which is a lifeblood. There's an umbilical cord between the people, actually not just here but across the country, between here and the NHS. And when you talk about things like free school meals or the minimum wage or the living wage as it's now called, it has a huge impact on people's lives, and when every penny is accounted for. So and I realised that because I've been not just an MP here since 2010, but parliamentary candidate since 1999. So it's had a huge impact on my views. And also, the other thing that Harlow taught me, which goes back to the flaws of Mrs. Thatcher, and what we all thought, that at the time I just felt, I believed in this idea that if you create enough economic capital, everything else goes good. But I realised that was wrong. And what you need is economic capital and social capital built hand in hand. So you need to build up communities as well as building up the economy. And she just concentrated, and she actually recognises in 1988 when she did this speech in the Church of Scotland, the famous, but actually you need social capital and economic capital have to go hand in hand. And although Harlow for some time hasn't had a lot of economic capital, well, that's hopefully changing, it's huge amounts of social capital because it's a new town. So there's an enormous amount of community. It's like a big village. Everyone knows everybody.
Yeah.
And there are an enormous amount of social organisations, neighbourhood associations, residents groups, you name it. And it's taught me a lot about that as well.
You're definitely not a serial rebel, but you have rebelled against your own party. It's difficult, isn't it? What's it like?
So since 2019, I think I've rebelled about 6 times.
Yeah.
4 of them were to do with domestic violence.
What
and
about
that was, in fact, you did the interview on another station because I had promised a constituent, who you know, Charlotte Budd, that I was going to support her. And it was on the issues about the family courts and training of things. And I thought the government were doing a lot of good things, but not going far enough. And I didn't want to let her down. I felt morally obligated to this one constituent. I'd had no other emails on it, nothing, but I genuinely felt morally obligated to her because I had worked with her and we had got some good changes from the government. The other one, I've rebelled on universal credit and on
the uplift, on the
on
20,
the
on
£20
keeping the £20.
uplift and on free school meals.
Yeah.
And because I don't support free school meals every holiday forevermore, because I recognise there's a cost to the taxpayer, but I did think during COVID and the COVID recovery period, it's got to happen. And in the end, the government did more than I wanted because I was asking for 100 million out of the sugar levy. They then did a 270 million package, having voted against it all and gone through all the political pain and not got any of the political credit.
Yeah.
And universal credit, again, for the same reasons. I'm not saying it should happen forever, but I think we're still in the period of COVID. I think people have struggled. It's a big cost of living issue.
Explain. I tell you why.
But it is very difficult.
This is interesting, and perhaps what our viewers won't realise is that it's actually quite difficult to rebel, not just because you're elected from a certain party. Actually, your colleagues don't like it either.
Yeah.
Some of your colleagues. So do you want to explain
Yeah.
the sort of dynamic
so it's very
of that?
painful. So I'm very, the Conservative Party's been my life since I've been 14 years old. It's like a family. It's a dysfunctional family, but it's a family nevertheless. And it's a bit like when you vote against your own government, it's a bit like being a member of a football team and it's a Saturday afternoon and the manager says he wants you to go and play out in defence. You say, sod off, I'm playing for the opposite team today. That's exactly what it's like. And no wonder if it was Alex Ferguson, he'd throw a Coke can at you, as he did. And that is what, that's why the whips are basically the football managers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Boris is the chairman of the club, the whips are the football managers. And so their job is to get legislation through. And it is very painful because take the free school meals. I voted against it because it's something I really believed in. I knew my constituency people were suffering. But then those colleagues who weren't able to do it for one reason or another and felt a sense of obligation and loyalty to the government, they got loads of stick for it. Loads of stick.
Yeah.
You get called in by the whips.
Yeah.
The whips will say to you, look, we've just given X to your constituency. You've just had extra funding projects, whatever it may be. And you go and do this to us. And there's all kinds of things that go on behind the scenes. So when the public say, we just want you to vote, they do not realise how incredibly difficult it is. One, because of your moral loyalty and obligation to your team. Secondly, because the government may have done things to my constituency, helped a lot in many ways in terms of funding, and they have actually. And third of all, you're letting your colleagues down who may not be able to vote, but they get all the stick for not voting on a very controversial issue. So I hate doing it, and I sleepless nights, genuinely, when you wonder about it and so on. I genuinely hate doing it. The domestic violence thing was different because I think there was only 1 or 2 MPs who were rebelling on it, and I sort of semi-cleared it with the whip. So you have there are certain issues that they understand why you're doing it.
Yeah.
But you always have to tell them. Otherwise you're just persona non grata if you don't tell them in advance what you're planning. Yeah.
So we know you as chair of the Education Select Committee, cross-party committee of MPs. They're very influential positions. You're always talking about those issues. You're always on the media campaigning and writing about the things that you're passionate about. in terms of education. But you were skills minister, you were a government minister in the Department of Education, and Theresa May sacked you. What's it like being sacked as a minister?
Well, it's not great. I mean, I'd done it for a year, and it was a job that I'd always wanted to do. I didn't want any job in government, and I thought I'd done a good job. I'd been told by the whips before the election that I'd done a good job. I got a bill through, which was controversial. It was about further education. And it just got through in time for the wash-up of the election, the surprise 2017 election. So I've been told I'd done a good job. So what happens is on the night before she does the main reshuffle, the people who are going to get the heave-ho, you get a call on going up to the Commons office. Now, I didn't realise, being a novice at the time, of being a novice being sacked, basically, a virgin sacking, basically, that if you get called up to the Commons office, it means that's it, cheerio. And she just called me in the room. There was the Chief of Staff, Gavin Barwell, there at the time, who's now a Lord. And she said, I'm sorry, I've got to let you go. And she said, you can go back and do campaigning on the back benches. But that was it.
Is there eye contact during an exchange like that?
There wasn't a lot of eye contact. And I asked her why. I said, I understand you have to do these things, but can you tell me why? But I wasn't told why. But I recognise that Prime Ministers have to do, they move people around, and sometimes you're lucky, sometimes you're unlucky. I think what I would have liked is a proper explanation. Either that she would have said, I've got to bring in people who haven't been in the cabinet, or I'm not happy with what you've done, and this is what you need to do. It would have been much better done like that, but what's done is done, and I get on perfectly well with her. I'm not kind of bitter. I'm very lucky, actually, because a month later I was elected chair of the Education Select Committee.
She's pretty feisty, isn't she, on the backbenches?
Yes, I actually thought she made a brilliant speech on Afghanistan. I completely agreed with her. I think what we've done in Afghanistan is a tragedy, and what the Americans have done is a tragedy. I'm a complete Blairite on these issues, funnily enough.
Or a belief that we can make the world better and we have a duty to do so. Absolutely.
Because otherwise, if we say the attitude is we can't do anything, we wouldn't have done anything to stop slavery, because we said that's what goes on. Some people, some cultures want to do it. And I believe in liberal democracy. It doesn't mean and just because you can't do it everywhere, it doesn't mean you can't do it somewhere. And they were doing a good job in Afghanistan with a few thousand troops, few deaths since 2014. And then we leave it to, I think Biden is a disgrace. I thought he was going to be good. I thought he was a breath of fresh air, given what had gone on before.
You wouldn't have voted for Trump had you been an American?
The first time round, possibly, because it's that going back to that loyalty, conservative or whatever. Second time round, no way. Especially after what happened in the Congress and so on. With the invasion of Congress, no way.
Right, so the Tories are in good shape right now. They, at the last election, they commanded a majority of working class votes. The Labour Party commanded a majority of urban, young graduates. Further down the line, so it's a massive problem for the Labour Party right now. Is there a demographic challenge for the Tory party, though? Or actually, if you hold on to working class voters, you will be fine for generations to come, and we shouldn't worry about the new graduates and the professionals?
I wouldn't say, I think we need fusion politics, and I do think we need to kind of make sure we get younger people and graduates. I don't think it's generations to come, but I do think if we get it right, we could have to support working people for quite a long time, if we get it right.
How do you get it right?
Well, we have to focus on cost of living and public services and skills and housing, and a relentless focus on the cost of living, because that is what matters to most people. Funnily enough, it matters to most people, whether they're graduates or whether they are the working people. And people just do not have enough money.
And what is that about increasing? What's the public policy options? Increasing the minimum wage?
Well, I'm absolutely in favour of the living wage, and this is where my politics have changed. If you'd have asked me at university, I would have probably campaigned against it. In fact, I probably did when I was a student. because I just believe free market business, and I was passionate as an MP supporting the minimum wage. And I was in cabinet when the decision was made. I supported Osborne doing it. I'm very proud of that policy, the national living wage. But I also think we have to focus on tax cuts for the lower paid. Now, where I am a Tory is that I do believe if you cut taxes for business, it generates more revenue. But what I think we should do is set up a redistribution fund, and conservative redistribution, not socialist redistribution, which basically says if we raise more revenue from cutting business taxes, and then what you do is you put that in a redistribution fund, you focus that either on spending on poorer communities or cutting taxes for the poor, the lower paid, and raising their standard of living. So that's where you redistribute the extra tax revenues raised from cutting taxes from business, we redistribute it to the less well off.
So hang on, let me try and understand that. So so there's an economic argument to reduce business taxes
because it brings in more revenue.
Right. So how does that? Just explain how it's distributed or redistributed.
Basically, I believe, and this is why I am Tory, and the evidence I think backs it up, that if you cut taxes for business, it does bring in more revenue to the government.
Right.
Okay. That's why I'm quite conservative.
Yeah.
That extra revenue, all that extra revenue that is raised, should be put in a special redistribution fund. Right, so let's say you get an extra 10 billion from it.
Yeah, right. Okay, so the government, I get it.
Puts it in a redistribution fund that gets redistributed to poorer communities, either in tax cuts for lower pay, or in spending on lower communities, or spending on those communities, on poorer communities. So I want conservative redistribution. I want redistribution, but I want it done in a conservative way, not necessarily a socialist way.
Okay, we're coming to it's been really fascinating chat. We're coming to a close now. Is there a common misconception about you?
I think people pigeonhole you. So they might say, well, he's a left-wing Tory.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I think I've just proved to you that some of my beliefs are right of centre on business. I mean, my fellow committee member who's just left the committee, called Jonathan Gullis, who is Red Wall MP, he jokes calling me liberal intelligentsia, and I said that I wouldn't have won many elections in Harlow by being part of the so-called liberal intelligentsia. He does it to wind me up as a joke. He's a lovely bloke, but they say that because you might vote for free school meals, and actually, I made an article in The Spectator said it was a very conservative case of voting for free school meals. And I tried to explain why the conservative case. I think people pigeonhole you without actually looking at the different policies. And then on the other side, you do a report on white working class boys and girls, which you interviewed me on GBNews. And then people say, oh, I thought you were a left-winger. So it's this constant pigeonholing that people get wrong.
Would you like to lead your party?
Not in a million years.
Would you like to be back in the cabinet?
If it was a job that I cared about, yes, but I don't want to go back for the sake of it. And the reason why is because genuinely this is probably the best job I've ever had, because I can say what I want. If I had been a minister now and you'd wanted to interview me, I'd have to get 6 weeks permission in order to do it. It's unbearable. And I'm a bit of a free spirit. So I found all that stuff very difficult. And whereas now you ring me up, say, would you like to do an interview? I say, yes, I'm delighted, or whatever it may be. And so I can say what I want. I'm a campaigner. I suppose when Theresa May gave me the heave ho, she did get it right in the sense that I am a campaigner. It will be on my blood. I love campaigning. I live for campaigning. And you can influence education policy in a big way as a committee chair. And because if you're active and relentlessly repeat the things that you're trying to campaign on, you can actually get the government to change.